It's been a good 2 years since my video looking at a few selections from Hamster's Arcade Archives series that I just think are neat. As I mentioned with that video, I'm a big fan of the series, and not just because it makes some cool games easily accessible, but it helps showcase some lesser corners of arcade gaming history. Since then, we've seen Hamster launch the Arcade Archives 2 series, which has introduced some iconic 3D titles into the catalogue, bringing some 90s arcade hits home for the first time. All of this means that, yes, I've kind of been feeling the itch to want to go back and cover some more, and as I've needed to structure things a little bit differently to get this one out the door, I thought it might be nice to go back to the well, pick a few more that are rather interesting from the Arcade Archive series, and explore them a little bit. First up, we have Konami's Block Hole, which you might also know as Craft. In this action puzzle game from 1989, the objective is to save the Earth from destruction from an assortment of blocks coming from space. You might think it involves a bunch of puzzling to match things up, but no, this one is a pure reaction test, as you need to be quick on the draw to fire enough shots at each incoming block to fill it up and erase it from the playfield. Now sure, it looks pretty darn simple, at least if you just want to survive. But to score the big points, you need to learn how to best fill them out in order to make larger blocks and clear them away. That's truly what makes an action puzzle game live or die in my book. The way it ramps up a fairly simple gameplay concept and really tightens the screws as you get further and further into it. The way in which Block Hole sets itself up in this way makes me want to dive in again and again and again as I was recording footage for the video, especially when I'd mess up a run, because I chose to get greedy, because I wanted to try and get those big blocks cleared and didn't quite fill it out in time. Now, as you'd expect from Konami games of this era, the soundtrack absolutely slaps, and that works wonders in helping keeping you driven in blasting away those blocks. One other bit I believe would make this game incredibly frantic is being able to play its 2-player mode. Sadly, I wasn't able to do that here when I was recording for the video, but I can only imagine just how much pressure you'd need to deal with if you were battling a friend at the same time. You might think Block Hole was just one of those games that tried to cash in on the arrival of the likes of Tetris, but I think it takes this really simple gameplay concept and adds a lot of that Konami flair to it. The more frantic pacing and the simpler challenges, it all adds up to making this game which happens to feel quite fresh out of the puzzling kind of experiences you'd find in the arcades during this time, and it's definitely one worth spending some time with if you like that action puzzle blend. So when you think Konami and the golden age of arcade games, there are plenty of iconic games they put out which really come to mind first and foremost, and many of them are already available as part of Arcade Archives. Now, Juno First, coming out in 1983, isn't one of those games, but it's one I find offers a solid challenge nonetheless, even though it's not the most groundbreaking of shooters in this gallery shooter style. The goal with each level is to clear out the enemy forces. Simple enough, I know. But the trick is holding out long enough for the carrier ship to appear, and that releases an astronaut when you destroy it. If you can recover the astronaut, you engage what's called chance time, where you've got a few seconds to nab a bunch of bonus points for taking out the enemies without them being as much of a threat. Like any old school shooter, later waves do start to turn the screws up, so unless you're really locked in and in prime blasting mode, it's one that can take you down pretty quickly. I guess for me, that's where the attraction lies with this kind of shooter, and for Juno First, there's this really interesting rhythm to how it all moves about that helps really build those feelings up. Unlike many other gallery shooters, here you could fly towards and away from the enemies, and that is used to help control the distance from them as you do battle with them. Life forwards to close the gap, then reverse to give you a bit of space, and there's this unique flow that happens as a result. On top of that, if things do get too tough for you, you can use the warp feature to get away for a moment of respite, though you only get a few uses of it in each stage, so don't get too used to relying upon it, as it might not have one to hand at a most critical time. First reminds me that games don't always need to be innovative to offer something that can get you wanting to push yourself further in order to beat the machine. Its core gameplay loop, its mechanics, might be simple, at least to its peers, but it offers this challenge that doesn't get too overpowering, at least until you're a few levels in, and it makes you want to come back as a result. I had a lot of fun just coming back time and time again as I was sort of playing through it and slowly boosting my skills up as I was recording footage for this one. When I think about how Arcade Archives helps bring back obscure games, Namco's Navarone is absolutely one of those which comes first to my mind, as it's one I never actually heard about prior to appearing in Arcade Archives. Now that's not really a surprise, as I do recall reading that this didn't really see why it released back in the day. I believe it was like just Namco's own facilities. So considering that was in 1980, I could really see why, especially as when you look at it, it does look a bit more primitive to some of their top-line releases of the day. The concept is pretty straightforward. You control that little ship on the edge of the playfield, and your goal is to clear out all the dots, for want of a better term, from the map. Efficiency is the name of the game here, as you're going to want to clear each level out as fast as you can in order to earn a bigger bonus. What also helps is prioritizing the bigger dots, as taking one out starts a bit of a chain reaction, destroying other dots in the vicinity. Now, you don't get any extra bonus points for this, you just get the points value for each dot, but it's great to help save a little bit of time in your clearing the dot mission. The challenge here comes from the enemy gunning placements, and they'll slowly increase their fire intensity from level to level. It's great that you can shoot down their barrages, as sometimes it can be tricky to negotiate your way through them, thanks to how the gunning placements are located. And so if you're a bit of a careless player, you might lose some of your precious lives in the process, moving around the levels. Navarone isn't necessarily a game that's going to keep you coming back over a long period of time. It is a pretty simple score-chasing game after all. But thanks to the Caravan mode, which is part of the Arcade Archives releases, I think it happens to make one that is pretty good and pretty simple to just pick up and play. Sit down and play a few rounds out while you're craving something that isn't too intense for a normal gaming session. Sometimes I think it's nice to have those games that you can just pick up, have a quick blast on, and put down before going back to something else. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I think it's just what someone might need if they've had a long, tiring day at the rat race. Spend a little bit of time just blasting your way through some oceans and clearing out enemy weapons and all of that. So a quick, solid blast distracts you for a bit. Nice way to rest. Now, I've shown a few odd cuts in this video so far, and Sun Corporation's Route 16 is another example of one of those. Each level consists of 16 rooms, or routes as it calls them, and you're tasked with racing about the map and grabbing the bags of money located in each of them. Now, early on, only a few routes will have money bags to collect, but that doesn't mean you can discount those empty ones, as they're worth visiting because they make an important means to avoid the rival drivers coming your way, because, let's face it, they're brutal. Brutal with a capital B. Skillful driving alone isn't enough to survive though, but holding down the fire button activates a big boost, and that gives you an extra burst of speed to get away from them. But this comes at cost of draining your fuel, and that doubles as your end of stage bonus, so there's a bit of a risk reward in there. If you minimise using the boost, you'll have more fuel at the end of the stage, but you might have a greater risk of crashing into the enemies. This Makes for a pretty simple formula, absolutely. But I love that it carries a lot of things that I love with these older arcade games, taking these simple rules, balancing them up with some variety and challenge to keep you playing over time. So, you're not just focused about collecting those money bags, but you want to find the bonus items as well. So you've got to be careful with that. You might get bonus points one moment, but if you're unlucky, the bonus counter will flip over to a bomb, and that'll take one of your lives. You might come into one that's in the flag, and that gives you a little moment of respite, letting you take out the enemies Pac-Man style. Or it might be some oil that slows you down, which is probably going to happen when you least want it to, of course. Now, being realistic, Route 16 isn't the most important arcade game of this time. It's a pretty neat one that I think does some cool little things, and it makes for a cool twist on the maze game formula. You know, there's a lot of games that channeled mazes and stuff in the aftermath of the likes of Pac-Man, and this does its own thing that I feel is unique enough to go check out. And if you're particularly attuned to these old school games, I think you'll have a lot of fun with it as a result. I always love a surprise when seeing what game gets the Arcade Archives treatment each week. And when it so happens to be an early one from a company known for some big hitters, let's just say my interest is certainly piqued. Scion from 1984 is one of the newest releases that got released, at least at the time I'm making this video, and I can't help but feel that while it's pretty much a response to Xevious, it does enough differently to make it its own thing worth trying out. Each level tasks you with a number of ground targets that you'll have to blast in order to proceed. When they're all destroyed, the level will end and you'll move on to the next. Thankfully, if you do miss one, the levels themselves aren't long, and they'll repeat so you'll get another chance to fly over and do it again. Now the challenge, the trick, is getting the weapon that lets you attack the ground target, as you'll need to acquire it from a downed enemy. More importantly, is that you need to protect it. As should it be taken out, well, you gotta wait for another one to be carried in to grab it and do it all again. Sometimes that can be a bit tougher than you'd expect, especially once you've gotten a few levels in and enemy attacks start to become more intense. Something I kind of appreciate seeing in games, especially in games of this era, is the sense of a wider space, and Scion does this in a rather neat way. When you complete a level, your fighter descends down onto the next, and eventually you reach the ground of a world to work your way towards the final target. Now, this might sound silly, but many of these games of this era, they usually featured a simple repeating background, and this layering that Scion has adds some depth, really helping it stand out in my eye. It kind of feels cool watching your little fighter dip down, and as you get closer and closer to the surface. Now, Scion doesn't really innovate much, and I think that's not much of a surprise for an early era arcade game. But it happened to strike a bit of a chord with me as I was playing it to record the gameplay. And I don't know about you, but that's what a good recommendation is about for me. Just seeing things that are kind of interesting and different, and trying them out and having some fun. I really had some fun with this one. Trying to master the attacks and survive some of those waves, the game can get pretty intense at points. And I really feel it's kind of special, if not groundbreaking in many ways. As you can see from this video, it's no surprise that I prefer the earlier days of arcade gaming. Those days that demonstrated the purest of challenges between player and computer. The days when it was about an increasing challenge, instead of forcing an energy drain or something else to make you throw in extra cash to continue. So I can't help but get a little excited when I discover a game from that era I haven't really experienced. And that's exactly what I feel when I started getting into Konami's Strategy X, a release from 1981. The assignment you're given is simple. Take charge of a little tank and fight your way through to the enemy stronghold to take it out. Firstly, it is a tank. And secondly, Is it as simple as it sounds? Absolutely not. You can't just rush into battle here, as cautious movement is necessary in order to avoid the minefields and hazardous terrain. At the same time, you're going to need to avoid enemy shots from enemy turrets, while you line them up and take them down. And the challenges come from this terrain, because sure, the grassy terrain you might run into, it might slow you down, make your tank slip about when you try to control it, but at least it won't kill you. Unlike the other fields. What really helps here is that you have the ability to rotate your turret, allowing you to aim in a direction independent of the one you're moving in. And that's ever so handy for lining up those shots against the emplacements. And at the same time, you need to watch your fuel, as this will dwindle as you move about, and you'll need to go refuel it from the depots that are around. Just be careful you don't blast them by accident, or line yourself up so that an enemy placement does that for you, or no. Like with many of these early arcade blasters, Strategy X is easy to understand, but hard to really click with and really get that challenge, that skill going. I found it quite a bit tough when starting out, but it's what I want to keep pushing with. And that's where this kind of era of arcade gaming really shines. You know, again, it's a simple mechanic with a bit of challenge on it that does ramp up over time. And I found it really thrilling to slowly understand it and make some progress cutting my way through it. And it really makes Strategy X a game that is the perfect contribution to the Arcade Archives library. So if you've been around the classic gaming space for a while, especially recently, I'm sure the Tower of Druaga is not going to be new to you. That's no surprise, as it has appeared in other Namco collections before, but this release of it in Arcade Archives adds one important feature that I think will allow people to actually understand it properly. So anyway, as the hero Gilgamesh, you're tasked with getting to the top of the titular tower, which was a whopping 60 stories that you'll need to battle through one at a time. Now, in theory, it sounds simple enough. You just need to find the key and make your way to the exit before time runs out. It's just each level happens to have a secret item. Some of these are optional. They're niceties that you can not necessarily require. Others, though, are absolutely essential to complete the game. Now the trick is finding out how to make each item appear, as the game offers no clues about this. So if you didn't know you needed to find these items, you would be completely lost. That, of course, is resulted in the famous things of the game in arcades having notebooks attached to it so that players could jot down what they discovered and that you could use the findings from other players. Thankfully, in Arcade Archives land, you don't need to carry a notebook, as a quick press of the trigger, the right trigger or the R2 button, displays a help screen at any time, and it shows you what the item is on a particular level, how important it is, and what you need to do to get it. Now I know for some players this might take a lot of the fun out of the game, but for me I kind of wish that if the game had had some internal clues, that this wouldn't be necessary. And if you didn't know about this, you'd be completely lost. So I think in an era where we're all pressed for time, I really appreciate that the discovery step is kind of taken out. You don't have to worry about it because you can just check it up and learn about it. I have to admit that Druaga isn't the most flashy of games out there. And even when you get the boots from the second stage that increase skills running speed, it is a bit of a slow one. It is a bit of a slow burn. But I really find it offers a unique challenge in learning to avoid and take out the increasingly challenged enemies, and taking advantage of Gil's sword and shield in order to survive. But the other thing that is really important about Tower of Druaga, it is foundational to a lot of other games, particularly action RPGs. A lot of stuff that happened in the late 80s was in response to this game. So being able to sit down and play it and experience it and have a bit more of appreciation of what is actually happening, what you need to do, and actually make some progress in it, well, I think that makes it rather special in my book, as a way to appreciate what is kind of a special piece of gaming history. Now for our last pick, which sees Taito modernising a classic once again. Thankfully though, this time they're taking on one of their own, in Volfeed. Volfeed takes the concepts of kicks, which is also available in the Arcade Archives, and modernises it. Firstly, by adding a plot. Well, it's more an intro than a plot, but it offers enough of a reason as to why you're having to take on each of its levels. The second is that it introduces waves of enemies into the mix. You don't have that central enemy you need to destroy and trap, but more active threats that you need to work around. Finally, there are power-ups. Yes, power-ups. Don't be surprised by that. As you're cutting the level away, you'll encounter boxes which you can enclose. Successfully enclosing one of these boxes will give you one of many temporary upgrades. Some are defensive, like freezing the enemies for a short period of time, or giving you a boost of speed. Others are offensive, like giving you weapons that you can attack the enemies with themselves. And that offers a neat alternative to ending the stage, than simply cutting away 80% of it, as you need to do. One of the big things I love with Volfeed is how it differs itself from kicks by streamlining your player movement. You don't need to just worry about being in slow or fast mode here, as you leave the boundary to start chipping away at the level. Instead, you just get on with it. It's a simple tweak, but I feel it helps keep the pace going as you're planning your movements. You still have to be mindful of what you're doing and working out your strategy as you cut away, but it makes it feel a little better, and it still means that you've got to be careful because you can be caught pretty darn quickly if you do it wrong. And that's never a good thing. Never ever. So I'm really a big fan of the way that Volfeed modernises the concepts of kicks, increasing the pace, and it doesn't compromise the core of the challenge all the same. Yeah, it can kind of be tough to learn, because the enemy patterns do mean things can get tricky, and sometimes it does have a very small room for error. But I think it's worth putting the time into. I think it's a game that is challenging and fresh. It keeps that concept feeling fresh and more dynamic with what you'd expect from a later era arcade game as it is. It's definitely one that I've had a lot of fun with, and one that I'm sure people probably know from its home conversions, but still doesn't mean it's worth ignoring in its original arcade form. Now that's the second batch of my picks from the Arcade Archives catalogue. Once again, I find a lot of joy in just finding these games from the episodes, not just because I can go to the well of what's been out there, because there's so many games available, but I could find stuff I might have missed. But it's also fun just trying not to fill the list with shooters. They're one of my favourite genres for sure, and even though they can be ridiculously challenging, they are a bit easier to get into. You know, it sort of contrasts with, say, fighting games, which I'm completely hopeless at, and I can't really do them justice in talking about them in a thing like this, so yeah, don't be surprised that you won't see those here. But as always, I kind of leave it to you at this point. Go check these games out. Hopefully you'll find some stuff that's new to enjoy. You know, as always, for me, the joy of exploring libraries like this is finding something you're not all that familiar with and falling in love with it. And that's really the joy of all of this for me. And I hope that if you're still here listening to this now, at the end, you're someone who's probably in the same boat as me in that front. You love exploring, you love discovering new things. And goodness knows, we all need a bit of that every now and then, especially right now. And with that thought in mind, there's not really much else for me to say. Just the usual, thank you all very much for watching.